service delivery, service management. This is Vicky Pope. So you work for CloudSoft. I believe you're based in Edinburgh.
I am.
So she's going to talk about really sort of marrying all the different service management deliverables together, ostensibly as I think environment as code. So I'll just hand over to you.
Perfect. Thank you. It's not on my screen, so it was really confusing. So thank you all for coming up. I'm a bit worried when you use like jargony terms like environment as code, that everyone would go to the next room and it would be me and Lauren kind of sat here just chatting together, which would have been nice, but not really why I'm here. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're seeing that platforms underpinned by environment as code is helping organizations at scale to kind of manage the whole process from the very point we think about and what we're delivering to our customers to managing that through the whole life cycle. And really, and you'll see what I do here, really how we can make our teams win together, given the theme of the talk today. But I wanted to talk a little bit about games first. So is there anyone in the room who doesn't recognize this game? Really? Okay. So anyone who doesn't recognize Tetris. So for those people who do recognize Tetris, it's a fairly common game. Could you easily describe how to play Tetris to the people who don't know how to do it? Could you talk about the principles of the rule book of Tetris? So Tetris is a game where a number of shapes of all different sizes come down into a block and you have to make lines. And when you make a successful line, you get points. And if you don't successfully make a line before it gets to the minute, you lose the game. So it's a simple rule that most people who are playing it sort of understand, which is great. And it would be great if the games that we play in our organizations had simple rules that we all understood and we all have a rule book. But actually games aren't simple. So we mentioned before, I'm a board gamer and I play board games typically with my husband and our two best friends. And my husband and my best friend play board games entirely differently. So, because I think board games like give people, you sort of see a bit of how they either are in the real world or how they'd quite like to be able to behave in the real world if there weren't consequences. So my husband, when he's playing a board game, he will take the move that makes him win by the very most, even if, and some would actually argue, especially if he sabotages the other players. He is in it for, I'm going to kill them all and I'm going to win. So that games master who said, yeah, you've all just died, he would be that person. He's actually quite nice in the real world, so it doesn't really reflect him. My best friend, on the other hand, yeah, she wants to win, but she'll want to win by building up her resources in her hand. And she often won't take the move that absolutely kills the other players. She'll do just good enough to win, much often to the absolute annoyance of all the other players in the room who go, no, you should have absolutely taken that move. So it means that she's unpredictable. And in the same way that in board games, people can play the same game, they can play by completely different win rules. And sometimes in our teams, we have the teams that are creating and trying to, create these products and develop them and deliver them and get them to market, working on a very different rule book to the people that have to manage them in perpetuity, that have to protect them from a security point of view, who have to make it all work together. So we're sort of playing the same game, but we've got different rule books to actually play that game with. And it doesn't help that at the same time, the game keeps changing. So in terms of being sort of around the IT world, who's been in the, I'm not going to embarrass people with age, so I'll only go so far. I reckon I'm probably around the latest in the room. Who's been in IT for less than 5 years? Okay, so there's a couple. Who's been in for less than 10? Who's been in for less than 15? Okay, everybody else is my people. That's good. We're not going to do it just in case anyone else thought we'd do that. Who feels like IT is a constant changing game, but you see the same patterns again and again? So we'll use terms, and we've all heard them before, and we'll all go, oh, well, that's the new jargon term, but it's exactly what we were talking about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Yeah, let's not go on in that.
It seems to me IT has made reinventing the wheel is the best practice.
Absolutely.
And I don't understand why we haven't learned that most of the problems that we have today were actually solved in universities back in the 1980s. And nobody ever goes back and reads the old books and says, well, okay, that's still happening, let's fix it.
Yeah, it's less fun to do it well. It's more fun to get involved in the time. So we know the game's changing. So there's ever increasing complexity in our environments. There's just more. You know, if you're like me, you might have, you know, even, dare I say it, pre-internet, you know, you worked in an office environment that was behind a network perimeter, and most of your stuff sat behind that network perimeter, and it was controllable and it was small. Now you've got to compete with different cloud environments, different software as a service environments. Your perimeter isn't, it's less clear than it ever was before. So there's more and more complexity. And when I think about some of the organizations we work with, so we work with a bank that's global. They have at least 1,000 applications. So 1,000 things that people are doing. And if truth be told, who thinks they know every single application that their whole organization is using? You think so? I'm going to ask your marketing team what online stuff they're using that you don't know about because it's software as a service. It's challenging to know that. So if they think they've got 1,000 applications, I reckon that's at least probably double, maybe even 3-4 more than that. We also have introduced, we love a new way of working, don't we? We love Agile. We love to be able to talk about the differences between Agile and Waterfall, and we'll talk about, I think I've heard Wagile is a new term, and we'll talk about the next thing. And I'm going to use some jargon later, and again, reflective of that need. We like to define things and change things, but we keep changing the ways that we work as well, not only the things that we're working with. We also sort of change responsibilities. So what we're seeing in a lot of teams that have development teams is more, it used to be maybe more clear that you develop something and it handed over to an operations team who ran it. Now that's less clear because often the operations teams may not have the skills to run it, and it was built by someone and never agreed by the operations team to take it on. So they're sort of, yeah, can you look after that because you know what it is? We've got hybrid IT. We start to talk about platforms and products and self-service within our organizations. We have different abstraction layers from the technology that we're using that we give to our teams. And in all of this, we want to move faster and faster. And we have customers, whether they're internal customers or external customers, who are, I want product-rich, feature-rich things with loads of security controls and guardrails that protect me, and I want it pretty quickly. And that is massively challenging. So not only are you trying to play Tetris and make those blocks all fit together, at exactly the same time, you're playing Jenga, and you're trying to avoid that brick that comes out and then the whole thing crashes. And I mean, I think when we looked at kind of disaster scenarios, you know, we're waiting for that moment where the brick comes out, we make the wrong decision to, oh, it's not ransomware, it's the SAN, and everything crashes, and we're doing that. So we're playing Jenga and Tetris at the same time. And as I'm very right-handed and can't play with your hands, I don't think I can do that. And that means we have this sort of precarious Jenga wall between our teams. And we've got the teams over here where we're starting to move. And these aren't really fixed teams of people. It's more kind of the archetypes of the teams within our organizations. But the people over here going, we want to build, we want to run services, we want to develop things, we want to go faster, we want to use it Agile, we want to use infrastructure as code, we want to do really clever things, we want to automate things. And we have the people over here going, okay, what are they doing over there? Why are they using that? And that product's not approved and that's not secure. And I'm not really sure that we should be using that. And how did they get to log on to that? And who's doing that? And how do we support it? And how do we balance that speed and governance? How do we modernize, our IT? And it's not like the Jenga walls falling on one person. These people are starting to have to run and develop the project. So more and more is coming on that side. So the wall's kind of tilting to them. They're trying to pull out bricks. The other guys aren't able to pull out bricks because you know what? They don't just deal with the shiny new. They've got to deal with that in an environment where they've got legacy and they've got a whole load of things to work together. And they need to make it work together like the Tetris wall. So they're not pulling the wall out. And then what happens is these guys can sometimes move on to the next product. And suddenly these guys are supporting things that they were never involved in and never challenged. So you've got that Jenga wall of priorities going on. But okay, that should be familiar to most of you in terms of a DevOps kind of discussion. It's something we've talked about for ages. DevOps was going to solve it. But does it? And I think it did in some ways. So the idea of making our dev and operations teams work together and breaking down silos absolutely brings benefits. And we've seen some of those benefits. But it can offer sometimes the DevOps teams quite a lot of cognitive load because they have to think about that whole life cycle. We're seeing more and more that the development teams are taking that on. And operations struggling under the weight of the legacy because you know what we're very bad at? Turning shit off. We will support legacy products because someone somewhere we think is using it and liking it, or some customer really likes that product that we've tweaked to no end of of being specific to them. And it's so specific, and you know what, we've sold that as a benefit for the last 7 years, so it's really hard to turn it off now.
Shouldn't you be measuring value? Because if the stuff is just being used by one person and not delivering any value to the business, fine, switch it off. But if it's something that's old-fashioned, well, like big Kix mainframe system, which the entire bank runs on, if that is delivering large amounts of value, then that should be part of the equation, and it might justify leaving it around.
I don't think you're wrong. I think that's aspirational. I think it is incredibly difficult for us to actually measure value in our organization. Those are I've made very exaggerated examples of one person using it and your example of the main core banking product. The problem is most of our services and solutions sit somewhere in the middle, and we judge. And how do we judge value? Is that revenue? Is that customer satisfaction?
We measure costs fairly easily. We've got trivial total cost of ownership type algorithms, probably not very good ones, but we have them. We measure costs, but we never measure value.
I totally agree with you, and I don't think we always measure cost well, because cost we tend to allocate to different cost centers. Where does your marketing team sit, but you don't sell anything? Where does your sales team sit?
On costs.
We do. Yeah. And I think, but then do we break that number down so it's a product cost to align what the customer is getting from the value is really challenging.
I'll try to say, I mean, it seems to me that operations delivers actual value continually for the organization, whereas dev just delivers potential value. And I think the DevOps thing should be more on the ops side than the dev side sometimes.
Who likes an ops here? Nobody. It's a shame, because the question I would have asked you if you were in ops is, do you feel valued by your organization? Do you feel that they recognize the value that you're bringing? And I would suggest a lot of ops people don't feel like they're bringing value, or aren't recognized for that value as well. So what we're seeing in a lot of our customers is more platform ops. Yes, so I'm aware, platform. So it's starting to be a bit of a buzzword again. If you've been around as long as I have, platform has done that cycle of IT terms, and it means different things to different people. And depending on your experience and your longevity, it has connotations that are good or bad. It's just, and it would be great if there was another word like that would describe platform. But it's that neat mix of wide enough to encompass all the breadth of platforms in our organizations, sort of simple enough for us all to understand, doesn't quite hit the mark, as IT terms typically don't, of what is an actual platform. What do you actually mean? How do we deeply define it? But it sort of prevails because we all sort of get it, and it's wide enough as well. So what is platform ops, and why is it different from that DevOps environment? So a lot of organizations had really good success when they started to break down the silos between the dev and ops teams. They made them work together. I mean, if we thought about your presentation earlier about, you know, gamifying a situation and putting people in different teams, you can understand that if you understand people's priorities, you have their same objectives, and you think about all the objectives, you can start to work with them better because you see it from their perspective. We get that. The problem is, and in a lot of organizations we're seeing, is when it scales, it becomes difficult, because you get, often what happens is you start to get this type of performance where we all have our lovely pizza box teams, because that's the latest thing. We want small agile teams. The problem is when you get to 5, 7, 10 pizza box teams, Mr. Brilliant at something here, he is actually needed in this team, this team, this team, this team, this team, this team. And there just isn't enough people or the right skill sets to operate these teams separately. And also, if you have all of these teams developing, I suspect, and I know from the organizations we work with, they don't all follow the same rule book. They don't develop in the same way. So then operations have to support, oh, they did it that way, they did it that way. And from a security point of view, a governance point of view, a compliance point of view, and just an efficiency point of view, it becomes really difficult to handle that. So the idea and what we're saying around platform ops is sort of putting that into the middle. So complementing the idea of breaking down the silos, but having tools with abstraction layers that are at the center of it and are able to scale. And our belief is that that needs to have a common language at its core, and common language as environment as code. How comfortable are people with the term environment as code in terms of describing it?
Yeah, happy.
Happy?
Yeah.
Okay.
About the developers using code to get instances in the cloud and stuff like that.
Yeah, or everything. That's a really good example. I'll come back to that.
There's no problem though with the business that the environment includes the business stakeholders, and it's very hard to get them into code.
Yes, absolutely. It is true. It is hard to do that. You have to use things that surface those to the business users. And that's why I think it's not just code, it's platform as well, because you have to have an abstraction layer for all the teams. So the abstraction layer for the developers might be that they can get things quickly without going through security positions because they're already built. The abstraction layer for the management team might be being able to see that product value that you talked about as an abstractive layer. And the idea between platform ops is the bridge between operations and development still, but trying to do that in a way that scales is more efficient and more consistent. And just like we never have an agreed term for platforms, the terms around platform also there. Gartner, for example, has used platform ops and platform engineering pretty interchangeably over the last 2 years. They've now decided that they're going to use platform engineering. We'll see how long that lasts, which is disappointing because I actually like platform ops because I think ops is more active. I think engineering sort of feels like, oh, it's engineered and then that's it. That's not true about our products. We have to manage them in perpetuity for a very long time often. And that's still active work. It's not like the work stops when the product is quote unquote finished or at production. It's actually, you know, often the problems happen after that. So the idea is trying to use code to, yes, improve your developer experience, but doing that in a way that the operations teams provide these balanced bricks for everyone else so they can offer golden path to developers. So they get choice, but they get choice from things that operations is comfortable with actually delivering. And I liken this to a common rule book. when you're playing a game. So environment is code. If you're having to go through it and show that you can code it, you can create this language and it can fit into the other things that you're working with on your platform, you start to tease out these common rule books that we need to use. Now, is the one-off product or the one-off tweak that you're going to do, is that ever going to be all part of your platform we're going to develop? No, nobody's got time for that. We're going to do the things that are repeatable and important and get them into self-service platforms. And what we're seeing in a lot of organizations is, again, IT, well, it goes centralized, decentralized, back to centralized, back to decentralized, back to centralized again. And I think we're starting to see a centralization around platforms and platform ops again. And it's about that. We need to work together, so we sort of have to centralize it. We need to centralize that by taking down silos between our people, but we also need some technology that helps us to do that.
Can't things like machine learning and augmented intelligence put an extra abstraction there and there, which
Absolutely.
helps the business, for instance?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know too much about machine learning. What I do understand is that machine learning looks at patterns and predicts the future from some of that patterns. Some of the things that we have will absolutely have those patterns that we can learn from and adjust. Some things won't as well. Some things will be really irregular as well. So Gartner is sort of saying getting ready for everything as code, because it's that basic common denominator around that the teams understand. And importantly, it puts that reliance on the developers to develop in such a way that operations can support as well by putting it in their code. But what is code? So you mentioned, thank you very much, you mentioned code as a way of bringing infrastructure into the organization. And I would say that's where we are now. Most organizations, that's where they're starting to think of, or we use automated ways through code to get our cloud resources, because cloud resources have sort of become a standard thing. We can do that and we can build those things up, but it's not enough, because your cloud resources and your infrastructure, whether that's on premise or cloud, is only part of the story. What we need to start coding in is all of the other things that become tricky and that your stakeholders care about. So not just your infrastructure, but what are your policies around that? How do you make sure the right people can get that? How can you measure it? How can you audit it? Your configurations as code, so your teams are working the same way. So your development teams, those different blocks of development teams, have standard practices that they're working at. Resilience as code, so you can actually take your resilience and see that mapped out all the way. And there's lots of things that in resilience and DR situations, that's a mix of how does the technology actually work? How does the infrastructure work? How does the decision making work? How do you do it? Who makes that decision that it's a SAN issue? And how do you flesh that up through the organization? And essentially our runbooks start to become the things that we're putting in as code, because we should be able to see those. And governance and compliance, I think, are going to become more and more important, that we have to build that in. We have for years, our auditing, our management of security processes can often be quite manual, and they're very reliant on people. As you scale, as we get this complexity, as we get software as a service, we get cloud, we get different environments, nobody's security budget is buying the people that can do that manually in the same way. So we have to start building that in the way that we work.
Can your reusable blueprint be a training course? Because a reusable blueprint sounds like it's a book of things to do. But I'd have thought that giving people a training course which embodies those principles is a more effective way of getting people to buy into them.
And I think in terms of technology, I think when you're coding, a blueprint means a particular way that it actually works because it's based in the code. But of course you can train that, and what actually the better blueprints are the ones that people have run through, have adapted. The problem is what we do in our organizations when we create something, our customer has a problem, they want a specific thing, we go in and we fix it over here. What we often don't do is put that back into the blueprint, so that maintains for every other customer as well. We can tweak and we can manually do that. We're putting that back into the blueprint. We do things in security audits where we say, oh, we should have done, this product, we do it this way. And that's good. We've got the tick in the box. Let's not tell the auditor about this product that doesn't do it that way. Let's say that process that we have over here is what we do for all of our products, which isn't always true.
You know, when you've got the environment as a code and you've got developers trying to do things quickly, you've got business trying to do things securely, and then you've got IT service management trying to do that holds everything together. How can IT service keep up with rapid development by cloud stuff like that?
It's a great question. I think that's where we are, that it's becoming impossible to do that by the ways that we work today. And what we're saying is this is why the platform question is coming more and more in, because people are saying, I need platforms that don't just talk to my developers. I need a platform that my operations team feed into and actually have a level of control. But what we don't want for the developers is they have to go through operations every time to get an approved change or to get a bit of cloud resource. What we're seeing more and more is operations being part of the self-service idea. So operations are part of, yeah, I am happy that if you give developers this thing in this shape with these guardrails and security, as many as other developers across the organization can have it. I'm happy that they can have this variation of it as well, because that still has all the guardrails that I'm looking for, and this variation and this size, and it's building those service catalogs of things. Am I saying that organizations are doing this perfectly? Absolutely not. But we're seeing this rise of this idea of platform being an abstraction layer above the different technologies, so we can bring those things and work together on them. And the more you can look at it from the top down, the more that your teams will unify, and it creates that breaking down of silos because you're looking at the same things. So it's golden path, not just yes. So I think platforms help us to work towards that common rule book that we can all play the game by, and that helps. I think that platforms also modernize and help everybody to modernize. So not just forget that we have teams that have to support I don't like the word legacy because it makes me feel, I'm a gardener, right? None of my garden is legacy. Yes, some of it was put in like 10 years ago. I still feed and water that stuff. It still looks pretty in the summer. It's not necessarily that. I prefer the idea of these are the environments that we've built. These are the things that we've done. And but they often have to manage those as well. And often our security rules, where we have standards, we know how we create standards in organization. What happens is a lot of people do the same thing and they all go, this worked really badly and this works really well, and we debate it for infinite amounts of time, and then we all come to a kind of collective this. That takes a lot of time to get to standards. So often your standards aren't applicable to the new and shiny thing that you've just got, because all of that learning, you don't know how to apply it yet to the new thing that you've got. And I think environment is called at the center of that. We have to start thinking in those ways. And I think it's like this. I am very bad at remembering things if I don't write them down. And I think where you write something down, and it's why I still work on paper. I did an interview yesterday and the guy went, oh, he taught us through his process, and he went, oh, because I have it to do this, and I know it should be on technology, but I have it on my notepad. And I'm like, and me and the other girl I was interviewing both held up our to-do lists and notepads, because there's something about writing things down end to end that helps you do that. And I think code is the new version of writing things down. So got some questions. Who here is hearing platform used in their organization or hiring for platform people? Interesting. So, and is that new, or have you always been calling it platform, or do you think that's a change and that's more what your organizations are starting to look at?
A couple of years.
Okay. Who here thinks that they have platforms in their organizations? And if I think of the definition of platform as it can be an all-encompassing thing that you try and build to deliver everything, or it can be something, it can even be small, it can be things that link your IT together. Who thinks they have platforms in their organizations? Pretty much everyone. I think as well, we're seeing differences and platforms changing. So if you look at things like ServiceNow and our ITSM tools, they're definitely spreading way past what they would have originally done, and they're starting to be platforms because they start at that self-service piece, and they're going, okay, we're linking this with our incident management, we're linking this with our operations, and it's those links that will help us create that shared rulebook. Is anyone doing this perfectly? Liar.
My colleagues, however.
I'm doing it perfectly. My rulebook is perfect. So, you know, I think you'll see a lot of platform ops. And yes, do you know what? We'll call it something else in 3 years' time. It will be called, I don't know, I'm going to make up the term and be famous for a week. But, you know, we see that centralization of platform. But I think that our platforms need to have that kind of coding basis, because we need to take it from the very first principles of what we're building right to operations.
There's a problem with ambiguity though. Code is great documenting something that's unambiguous. But it's not very good at documenting things that are ambiguous or sometimes go this way, which is why I think the artificial intelligence, or sort of augmented intelligence, plays a part in this, because code tends to make you think that you know how things work, and in the real world they work mostly that way, except we've got this guy with a big brain that does different things slightly in special cases. It's very hard to put that in code.
I agree, but I think if IT was unambiguous, none of us would have jobs. So we're going to offer it with some, but I think ambiguity is something that we always strive to kind of move towards, but there is, and even in AI and ML, there's still an ambiguity. I think that you can always have, when you're doing stuff that's new, you always have an ambiguity because you don't know the next thing.
But ambiguity, yes, I agree, that's good. It's code that's bad, because code just forces you to make a decision. We'll do it this way or that way, whereas in fact in the real world, perhaps doing it both ways is a right way to do it.
I think that on the other hand, sometimes making the decision is more important than hovering over it. You know, I think code can help to make those decisions and create those rule books.
Yeah.
Do you find basically the application of consistency trumps necessarily precision? So I guess it's kind of where you're going with that, David.
Yes,
ambiguity.
Yes. It probably depends a little bit on what you're doing, because there was times when people made a fortune doing trading, arbitrage trading and so on, in which doing things very much by the seat of their pants made so much money that it actually justified the risks they were taking. Mm-hmm. Whereas for less profitable things, the risk was unacceptable and consistency was the much better way to go.
I think, and I take your point about trading, I think most companies would prefer to have lower risk. Risk is a problem for businesses.
Just a point on that arbitrage trading, the risk justified it, except for the companies that went bankrupt.
Yes.
Bearing Bank did really well out of it.
Risk is good when it falls in your favour.
Yeah.
Do you think after environment as a code, do you think the next step is sort of low code, whereby if this doesn't work, or even if it does work, that's the next natural progression?
I don't know. I love the idea of low code, no code. And especially because I'm not a coder and I'm not technical, I'd love to be able to build my own stuff. And I've done some of that stuff in marketing, and I don't know if it's sophisticated enough yet, or I don't know if you can build products completely in that way, but I certainly don't know enough about good low code kind of tools.
IT will tell you it can't be. You can't use low code because they've got a vested interest in not automating what they do. You can automate what bankers do, you can automate what coders do. If you ask a coder, they'll say you can't automate what I'm doing because they're protecting their jobs.
Yeah.
And I'm testing from way back.
Although I do think some coders go, nobody can automate it quite like I can automate it. Maybe it's this. A couple of questions.
I was just going to say, there was one particular thing you mentioned that I really picked up on, where you were talking about standards.
Yes.
And configuration standards. I've got a client who have managed to get this past an auditor using their Terraform files as their documented standards for configuration. So are you seeing Or are you imagining compliance as code?
Yeah, and
more and more with this.
It's really interesting that you say that, because we just went through, it wasn't an audit, but it was a review with suggestions so around that. And actually what really impressed us is the auditor, they weren't auditors, the reviewers who came in and gave us, they had a lot of technical knowledge, and they were able to say they understood like our repositories and GitHub, and our IT guys were really actually sort of impressed, because they were like, oh, I haven't had to sort of explain this whole world of standards that we've created as developers to these auditors. So I think, yes, they're starting to get smarter, because it's practical, right? There is standards there is practicality there are good ways of doing it, and auditors will typically pick up on that.
There are definitely auditors who don't, because I've had those arguments.
Yeah.
There are more.
And yeah, as I say, was a surprise when we had ones that did. So. Any other questions?
I was just going to comment on the no-code, low-code thing, because I see it as carnage, because I'm from the ITAM world.
Okay.
And quite frankly, if an idiot like me has got access to something where I can create an app, that terrifies me.
Yep.
And it means that however many controls and governance and processes and policies there are in place, if I've got access to that technology, it's carnage. And it's kind of like, I think it's going to be worse than the access database sprawl that we had to cope with in years gone by. So yeah, carnage.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think there's a level of inevitability around that, and
yes.
we'll have to create standards to
Yes.
deal with that.
It's horrific.
Everybody said the same about cloud 20 years ago.
My 2 cents on that, where I spoke to a customer earlier this week who is looking to move an Access database,
Yeah,
and I was like, wow, and they're like, we're putting it on SQL
That's
Server
good.
next week. I was like,
honestly.
you guys are moving into the 90s. Well done.
Yeah, we all
But
laugh. but
they also have
still
service
a
now,
thing.
which has got this cell of this low code. What my thinking with this is that people's brains work differently.
Yes.
And there are certain people who make very good engineers, and engineers are well known for not being like really great people and all of this kind of stuff, because they think very logically. And people who don't think very logically are not good people to create logically structured apps.
Yes.
Yeah.
They might be able to use them well,
Yeah.
and they might be able to give really good feedback. So the whole Agile thing. So one thing I've really noticed with this group, is you've been here a lot over the years, right, is we have service management people, and we have IT asset management people.
Yeah.
And the way of thinking tends to be quite different. And I cannot imagine me doing your kind of jobs.
I can't put myself.
You know what?
And when I talk to Kylie's idea of hell is doing what I do for a living. But we both love what we do,
Yeah,
right? So there's different
absolutely.
places for us within the world.
Mm.
And I think this idea of trying to make platforms that say, well, everybody can now be a coder. To
Something
me,
like,
that's a bit like saying, well, everybody can be, a really great sensitive person, and not everyone can be.
there's
you
something
know.
that gives me a little bit of hope, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, and maybe I've had too much coffee and not enough sleep. But everywhere, who in here thinks they're not a coder?
No way, and I shouldn't be.
I think, well,
How much reporting do you do in Excel?
Oh, don't. All right.
And what I mean is,
Yeah.
most automation in organizations, I pretty much bank on our biggest automation tool in most of our organizations is in Excel. And to your point about low code, no code, is because we've created a common rule book that we all understand. We understand the logic behind it, and we use it. Am I advocating that you give up everything and go to Excel? Absolutely not. But I would suggest that probably if we were looking at automating, the things that we never do is automate our Excel workbooks, because everybody loves their own logic and do that. But it doesn't mean it doesn't have a common book, a common stand behind it as well. So maybe there's something in that. Can't believe I'm advocating. I love Excel. Pretty spreadsheet is good, brings me joy.
How many of your Excel spreadsheets got bugs in? Most Excel spreadsheets are.
At scale, I agree.
and most people don't realise they've got bugs. in
That's
them.
Yeah.
It's the unknown
that's
bugs.
Spot on.
Yeah. But you
I agree. How
can't-
many of your Excel suites can you fix yourself though?
Yeah.
So that's when a problem happens and you go, that doesn't work. Often you can go in and go, I understand the logic to fix it. I understand that my points on for, so there's,
good
and again,
no-code.
I'm not here advocating for Excel, but I sort of think
But
that's
good
it.
no-code stuff is not like Excel. because it comes with automatic guardrails built in. So
Some.
to be no code, effectively no code, you have to have the guardrails in there to make sure that you can't just do anything and ignore all stakeholders. Excel lets you do too much and lets you hide your bugs.
Yes.
True, and both those things are they're good. Good. There's a reason we shouldn't all be using Excel.